ABC News reported, Perry played a key role in helping lift the school's academic ranking. Since Perry arrived at Lawndale, the percentage of students to track to graduate school has nearly doubled.
I think for me as a counselor, because a counselor and not a principal, you don't always have the buy-in. And so the approach that I took is kind of finding those people who were on board with me and what I was trying to do, which is ultimately around, building community, making school a place that kids want to walk into, making sure when you open the door, it's bright and inviting and people are smiling and happy that you're there. The speech that Michelle Obama did at my event was actually the first speech that she did after leaving the White House. I think that there's, we're seeing it now even, opportunity gaps widening with kind of grants and scholarship opportunities being taken away. In her speech as well, I know that she also talked about, people in high positions that you'll never meet, and also those that are on the ground. And she was really emphasizing that those on the ground have the higher impact because we can bring people together. We can let kids know that they're loved, they're cared about, and there's people that are really always standing behind them to support them. And I think that that was critical at that time. And I think that was the message that she was trying to push through then, which I think is still relevant today.
Ladies and gentlemen, the 2018 National School Counselor of the Year, Kirsten Perry.
Kirsten Perry was chosen among 6 finalists across the country for her work at Lawndale Community Academy on the city's west side. Perry played a key role in helping lift the school's academic ranking.
What always impresses me about this community, my students and their families, is their amazing strength and resilience despite the obstacles that life has given them.
So to Kirsten and every school counselor and educator in this country, I hope you all know that you have far more influence on our children than people they don't even know.
Welcome to Beyond the Book, podcast that jumps into the stories of expert individuals in their respective fields from the world of academia, medicine, and health, artistry, entertainment, business, and beyond. We hope you enjoy each guest who courageously opens chapters for us to view. Maybe their wisdom, lesson, or experience can provide some perspective upon your own story as we all look to soar across the pages of life. We're introducing a woman whose influence reaches far beyond the counseling office and into the very fabric of how schools care for children. She is not just a school counselor. She is a nationally recognized advocate for students' well-being, social-emotional learning, and educational equity. In 2018, she was honored as Counselor of the Year by Michelle Obama, a recognition reserved for educators whose work fundamentally changed lives, not just outcomes. She has served as a social-emotional learning specialist for Chicago Public Schools, helping shape how one of the nation's largest school districts understands trauma-informed care, emotional intelligence, and the responsibility schools have to support the whole child, not just the test score. Her work lives at the intersection of mental health, academic success, and humanity. She has walked alongside students through moments of uncertainty, supported families through crisis, and partnered with educators to build environments where students feel seen, safe, and capable. This conversation today is about what real student support looks like, why SEL matters now more than ever, and what happens when compassion is paired with professional excellence. Today, we're going beyond the titles, beyond the book. Please welcome the champion of counselors, a leader, the trailblazer, Kirsten Perry.
Thank you, Cameron.
How's it going?
Good.
So thank you for joining us. Okay.
Thank you for having me.
We were on a Zoom call probably a few days ago.
Yeah.
And the main thing that I wanted to stretch to my audience is how big of an opportunity this is for educators, counselors, huge districts who are looking to support students. I want you to tell us a bit about your background, how you grew up, where'd you grow up, and, just how did that impact you day one of your journey?
Okay. I like to think of my upbringing as 2 parts. So I grew up in a suburb of Chicago called St. Charles. I lived there through my elementary, middle school years. And when I look back at that time, it was in the 80s. And that was a time when there was not a lot of supervision of children. We just kind of like let kids outside. And I was one of those kids. I really feel like at that time, so much of my upbringing was just using my imagination, playing. And I think it really steered me to having a creative mind. So I think that's definitely a big part of my formative years. I'm the youngest of four. And so that's why I like to think of my upbringing in two parts. My younger days, I had older siblings, there was always kids in my house. The second half of my childhood, we moved to Chicago. So I did high school in Chicago. And then I'm the youngest of four. So my siblings were leaving the house. And so then I found myself very kind of, alone a lot and kind of alone with my thoughts. And then again, I think that kind of steered me to having some level of independence without having them at home.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, before we go any further, okay?
Yes.
We want to shout you out.
Okay.
You're going to get your flowers today. Okay. I know I may not be Barack Obama. Yeah. All right. May not be Michelle,
Mm-hmm.
but, we want to make sure that we, put this on display for the people, because this is something that I haven't been able to pretty much introduce this to the school district where I'm at. But I encourage every single person to please purchase this book. Educators, phenomenal stuff. It lays the groundwork for what SEL can be and could be in certain academic spaces, and also for counselors who are looking to actually be the best within their own educational acumen. So the ABCs of social emotional learning for school counselors and administrators. Before we get back to the regular questioning, how did you feel when you completed this? Because this is amazing.
That's actually a really good question. I've had people ask me, do you feel proud? What an accomplishment. And I don't know that pride is the feeling that I feel. I think doing the book for me was really just coming from, it's interesting that there's a heart on the cover. It just really was coming from a place of love and passion and things that I've learned throughout my career. And I feel like more than I feel proud of myself, I feel proud of all the individuals that contributed to the book. One of my goals was to leverage people who I see as experts, people I've known personally in my careers who've been very successful doing this work in schools. So I really feel like for me, it's less about me and more about others. So I don't feel that pride, but I feel the passion.
You saying that actually, because I took a few minutes here. Okay. So you saying that when you say it's, much about others, you said something here. You said, I always emphasize we. It was a collective effort that led to the improvements that we were seeing in the school. It is not because of me alone that did this improvement, and how it happened. Strength is in community. So, I mean, as some of the young people say, you live in what you preaching.
Yeah.
And those are the things that I really admire. And I feel like, in my opinion, a lot of people, whatever field they're in, looking to aspire to understand that it takes much more than just self. You talked about your background and how you grew up. What's your educational background?
Okay. I usually like to tell my educational background as a little bit of a story and how I came into the field of school counseling and kind of how I fell into that.
Sure.
And so I know I shared about my upbringing, but what I didn't share is that, being the youngest of four, you don't always have a lot of supervision. There's a lot of influences around you. And I fell into using alcohol at a young age in middle school. And then as I grew up and moved to Chicago, that just kind of continued. And I would say by my junior and senior year, I was very disengaged from school. I ended up graduating, but I had very bad attendance and I had to go to summer school to complete my high school diploma. I soon after got pregnant. I was 18 years old when I got pregnant with my son soon after I completed high school. My son's father, I don't always share his story, but lately I've been sharing it a little bit more just because I'm realizing how much his story is also a part of me. And so he lost his mother at the age of 16. And I think the school going, us being educators, and I look back at this now and I see so much that the school could have done to help him. But he was externalizing his grief a lot, getting into fights. He ended up getting placed into an alternative school for behavior. That then led into him kind of being in and out of the prison system throughout my 20s. So I was raising my son mostly on my own. My son's father was in and out of jail through that time. So I've also seen the impacts of that. I did get my college degree. I'm fortunate that my family was able to support me the way that they did. But I don't feel that I had good guidance about getting a diploma for something that you could actually do a job with. Right. And so for me, it was just strictly based on interest and not really thinking about a profession. So my undergrad was in history, but with a focus on world religion. And I think that kind of having that exposure, looking at world religion in a historical context kind of gave me a spirituality where I was kind of connecting to kind of more of a greater good of what I want to do and be with myself. I found myself at 28 years old with no career, nothing really solid to stand on, no way to, I was struggling basically as an independent woman, but I made a conscious choice not to give up on myself and decided I wanted to do something where I could have impact. And so I remember just opening myself to the world. I looked at all the different possible programs that I could do. And I said, whatever I do, I want it to be authentic. And for me, that ended up being school counseling. And I think what it came down to for me is that I wanted to help kids like myself, maybe not making the best choices. I wanted to help kids like my son's father, helping school systems be able to identify, the root cause of his behavior and be able to help kids like my son's father to have a better path in life. And so that's ultimately what guided me to it and kind of my educational career. I went to UIC for my undergrad degree and DePaul University for my master's.
Nice. A lot of education.
Yeah.
One thing that I want to express and probably share with my audience is you've done a lot of different things in the midst of turmoil and mystery, pretty much. With people who are watching this, can you give us maybe some tools or some tokens or some strategies that can pretty much help us push forward in those times? Because I never knew that. I never knew that you battled with what you battled through in high school. And from the outside looking in, it people say, hey, you know what, she's doing great, and it has always been doing great. Has always been supported. Has always had a system where she was able to pretty much be comfortable. And there's a lot of uncomfortability there. What are some things that people can take away from you going through that?
That's a good question. I think for me, the takeaway is that it's never too late. And always to push yourself. I think a lot of times we put limitations on ourselves about what we can and can't do. And being able to, tell yourself that, yes, I can, that I still have access to these things. It's not too late, and you can keep pushing yourself. And I think that, sometimes that can be the message. I know that later, it's interesting because I've shared this before. Later in my career, I know there was someone that reached out to me and he said that he heard me speak at the American Counseling Association conference where I shared my story. And he said at the time, he wasn't thinking he was going to make it through or that he was going to, move forward with his college degree. So it took me 7 years to get my college degree. I didn't mention that. And this person reached out to me and they said, that really inspired them to say, hey, I could keep going, even though it's taking so long, that's okay. And he did it. And then he messaged me that, like, you inspired me. And then what's amazing is that years later, I got a second message from him and he said, I just wanted to let you know that I did it. And he sent me a picture with his cap and gown.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. For everyone who's watching us on YouTube right now, please, if you're loving the content, make sure that you subscribe, hit the notification bell. So first off, I want to get to you. You served in CPS.
Yes.
Now, what was the position that you held before that? Because I know the in CPS you served as district, and you also was a CL specialist.
Yeah, so obviously I was a school counselor, and then I had two different leadership roles in Chicago Public Schools. One was a school counseling specialist, where I basically helped coach school counselors throughout the entire district. And the second was as a social emotional learning specialist, where I coached 27 schools.
In a nutshell, can you tell me about that experience? CPS can be, a lot of everything. And, working as the positions, let's say the first position that you held first.
Yeah.
How was that experience? And then talk to me about, coaching, over, 700 school
Yeah,
counselors.
I know.
Jeez.
People are like, how do you even do that?
Right.
And at the time, it was just three of us. That office is a lot bigger, but there's different pieces to it. But the part that I supported was the development of comprehensive school counseling programs. And there's only three of us for the whole city. And so people are always like, how did you do that? But we would divide up our professional development into sections. So we do 250 North Side, 250 West Side, 250 South Side, large professional development sessions, and then kind of almost like a multi-tiered systems of support approach. We would then offer, smaller sessions, more individualized sessions for counselors needing additional support. And then we also did specialized trainings as well based on our district goals and what we were working towards in that office.
So you used MTSS and implemented it on counselors.
Basically, I mean, I don't know that we ever called it that,
Right.
but that's the way that you could think of it. Like we did things for the whole district, and then we kind of narrowed it down to more specialized supports.
And you used data to help measure how they're progressing throughout.
We did. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. I just want to read here. Kirsten served as president of the Illinois School Counselor Association from 2019 to 2021, where she spearheaded the development of the ISCA Race and Equity Credential, a 3-day training program for counselors focused on building anti-racist practices in schools. Talk to me about that initiative a bit. What led to that?
Sure. I mean, this was the time right after George Floyd was murdered. And I remember when it happened, and I think it was the next day. So I was the president, and then there was a president-elect. And I remember I called him up and said, what are we going to do? And one thing I'm really proud of that I didn't know till later is that we were the first school counseling association to speak out in support of Black Lives Matter. So I always feel proud of that I feel like in some ways we were trailblazers for even other associations in the country. And so basically that's how it came about. So the first thing I did is I put together a steering committee, dominantly school counselors of color throughout the state of Illinois. I brought everyone together to have dialogue and conversation about what to do. I had experience in Chicago Public Schools, actually in my school counseling role for the district office, where we had developed a credential called the Chicago Equity and Access Advising Credential for middle school counselors. So I had already been working on this kind of stuff. So I kind of had that context already. And so I proposed it to this committee. What if we do something similar and we create a training and a credential on anti-racist practices in schools? Because we do feel like schools ultimately are vehicles to help break down these systemic barriers that are throughout the state. And so that was one reason why we decided to do that. And also I like to think long term, because I knew, I'm the president for the short period of time, but how is this work going to live on without me, and that was one reason, I mean, not without me, but without the president, because sometimes I see when the leader leaves, the work leaves, but I wanted to make sure that when the leader leaves, the work stays. And so that's one reason why it was really important to me that we had a committee that was going to continue to be there after I left, continue to work on, not only making change within the organization itself, but also seeing this credential live on. And it actually has, and it keeps expanding. I take no credit for anything that happened after I left because the committee keeps working on it. But what's amazing is that in 2023, it was honored by the American Counseling Association as a Pinnacle Award finalist. So I feel really proud of that. And I feel like for me, it's more about making the work live on and having impact throughout the state of Illinois.
When you speak about things like that have a direct impact on communities, that's something that I believe is a example of who you are and who you've been in education. And you talked also about establishing a foundation that can live on. Being a leader within education is something that's not easy.
No.
Because you're dealing with so many different things. You probably have like 100 things coming to you at once. Yeah. ABC News reported, Perry played a key role in helping lift the school's academic ranking. Since Perry arrived at Lawndale, the percentage of students to track to graduate school has nearly doubled. Lifting a school's academic ranking. What goes on behind the curtain? You mentioned a few things that you've done. Can you take me back to that process? Maybe if you remember day one or week one, year one, tell me how that happens. How does that happen?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I could speak a little bit to my own work at Lawndale, and then also I was with a principal that I used to work with just recently.
Sure.
We're both talking about this because we both still have interest in this to this day. Like, how do you lift schools up? And it's interesting because she took a different approach than I did. And I'm a school counselor. I'm not a principal when I was at Lawndale,
Yeah.
But I was working very closely with the principal. I mean, I worked with him every single day, pushing the work forward. And I think for schools like the school I was in, where the performance level is so low that, there needs to be foundational practices in place. And that's really where it starts, laying the foundation. And interestingly, I think the foundation is relationships. I think that it's building relationships with students. I think it's building relationships with communities. I think it's building relationships with teachers. And it really comes down to that from my experience. And I feel like, one thing I did working in Lawndale is I was always looking out into the community for who I can collaborate with. I was listening to parents, I was listening to students and asking people what needs to happen, and doing what they said, doing what the kids wanted, doing what the parents wanted, doing what the community wanted, and really trying to work together to make that happen. I think for me as a counselor, because I'm a counselor and not a principal, you don't always have the buy-in. And so the approach that I took is kind of finding those people who were on board with me and what I was trying to do, which is ultimately around, building community, making school a place that kids want to walk into, making sure when you open the door, it's bright and inviting and people are smiling and happy that you're there. And just starting with people who wanted to work with me and kind of building from there and allowing it to grow. Now, my principal friend who did similar work, I think I'm not going to speak for her exactly, but what she was sharing with me is that she did the same thing at the school she was working. It was really kind of getting to the relationships as foundational practice. So she really worked on building teaming structures within the school, getting teams to work together collaboratively, going back to the mission and vision and the why. Why do we do this work? Feeling motivated and inspired, seeing everything, challenging our biases and our thoughts and feelings about students, families, and communities, and really building up from there, our belief systems and what do we really see and believe in about students and families. And a lot of times in schools that are struggling, there's this, kind of inherent of, oh, the kids can't do this, the families can't do this, but that's not true. Of course, we have to have high expectations, and we do absolutely, our kids could do this, and, don't think that way. That's not the way that it really is. And it's kind of shifting mindsets is foundational. And then from there, you can start working on building the systems that need to be in place. I do think leadership requires organizational skills, relationship skills, and organizational skills. And if you don't have organizational skills, knowing who to tap on that has those organization skills, because it involves a lot of structures that need to be in place for communication, challenging our belief systems, setting those high expectations.
As a counselor, because a lot of the time when we look at different boards, we look at districts, they're looking at numbers and what moves the needle. Mm-hmm. And looking at students' standardized test scores is a huge metric. Do you believe that counselors can truly make a difference if they aren't building relationships, if they aren't a positive, impactful difference, if they aren't stepping inside of the classrooms, if they aren't talking to teachers, if they aren't engaged in PDs and trying to get some sort of feedback from leadership?
Yeah, I definitely think for counselors to get the buy-in that they need to do the work that they need to do. It's even my book, that one of the acronym is for collaboration, because it's so necessary, and collaborating with teachers, understanding, what they need and how you could work together, because nothing's done well in isolation. And so we need to figure out how it all goes together and how all the pieces of the puzzle fit together to support students. And I always find that when it comes to data, that, there's a lot of different data metrics that we could look at. But I think it's important to not just look at the data itself, but sit together with people with different lenses to have conversations about students and what do they need. So maybe you have even the dean or the security guard and the teacher and the counselor, and we could really kind of have a more holistic view of students to better understand their needs.
I agree.
Yeah.
A student, Kyla, was failing her classes and having behavior challenges. Assuming she was in 8th grade at this. By the end of 8th grade, her behavior improved and she was on track academically for high school. Yeah. What's special about that student that you mentioned, and students like?
Yeah. Well, I think that, Kyla, and I love her so much, and I actually saw her last summer. I got together with her and her mom, and we caught up with each other because she's actually one of the students I brought with me to the Counselor of the Year event. And so she also got to meet Michelle Obama.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So
I would have liked
she also got to meet Michelle Obama too. So we're always like, we're bonded for life,
right?
Because of Michelle Obama.
Right.
But I think with her, I think it kind of goes to the root cause. And I think that, she had a lot of things going on in life that she was managing, and just, and I think with her being successful, like I always say, it's not just me, it was me, her teachers, it was, I had after school programs that she was getting invested in, but really getting her kind of more invested in her education is what contributed to her. So I think it was all of us working together to support her. What's interesting is when I was the Counselor of the Year, and I was told I was a finalist. So this is before I knew I won. They said, they just told me I was a finalist. They said you could bring 6 people to the event. And I really struggled with that because I felt like, who's the right people to bring to the event? And I decided that I wanted to bring people from the North Lawndale community. So I actually told my family, sorry, y'all are not going to be able to come. And Kyla was one of the people that I wanted to bring with because I felt like she was such, she was a student that I saw such great success with. I was so proud of her. So I wanted her to come with me, just as I'm really proud of how much she grew. What's interesting, though, is that when she went to, so I told her this, you're coming with me. She's excited. And then I got a phone call from the principal of her new school that she was slipping again. And then I found out I won. And when I found out I won, they said the students have to speak at the event. And I'm like, shoot, she's not doing good in school again. Right. So she was up and then she fell. I'm like, shoot. And then I was like, I can't bring her with Michelle Obama. You're not doing good. So I had to talk to her. You fell back down again. Yeah. But her mom called me. Her mom, I love her mom so much, but her mom called me and said, you have to bring her. I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't care that she's slipping. You have to bring her. And it was a life-changing experience for her. After that event, she went back to school. She was on point. She got a scholarship, went to college. She did not finish college, but she did go. And, she's still planning to go back to college. But I think when we talk about that, though, with students is that, growth is not linear. I mean, that's the real realities of life. There's ups and downs. But I think it also goes to show, like, having people believe in you. And knowing that people want the best for you and they're not going to give up on you is what my takeaway for her is.
The more you speak, the more my respect for what you've done and how you handle yourself skyrockets.
So I brought my student who was failing.
Right. Like, meet Michelle Obama. You don't have...
My baby come, I'm like, fine. She's coming.
And that's, I respect you so much because you keeping it real. Like, hey, you know what? Yeah, she got her grades up, but she didn't finish college.
She didn't finish. I wasn't happy about it.
Yeah, yeah. And, you're doing so much. You can only control so much also. Talk to me about you want to actually establish yourself in the world of academia, right? Yeah. And you come to North Lawndale. Certain things that I read inside your book, they say, hey, let's see how long she's going to last here.
Yeah.
Right. Talk to me about being someone who's coming from another community who looks like you.
Yeah.
Coming in, you got these kids, you got all black kids, looking at you. Okay, let's see what she's going to do. Talk to me about how you possibly felt in that moment and what helped you overcome those feelings. And also, if you can, if you can, what are some things you've learned along that journey?
Yeah. That's a good question. So I think for me going into North Lawndale, I mean, as a white woman, I'm actually quite familiar being around Black people. My son's father is Black, actually. And, quite familiar. And I think what I know is that there is a genuine distrust of white people. I mean, it's just, of course there is. Yeah. And I know that. And so for me, I know that, one thing I didn't want to do is come into a school or community like North Lawndale thinking that I know all the answers. Here I come and I know what to do.
Right, exactly.
Because the truth is, I don't know what to do. I
didn't.
Yeah, right. I didn't grow up here. This isn't my experience. Right. I'm an outsider, and so for me, I knew that, and so I went into North Lawndale asking the community, what do I need to do? You tell me. I talked to parents. I talked to students. I talked to teachers, and I really leaned on teachers or faculty members who grew up going to Lawndale Community Academy as well. Like, you tell me, because they went to school there, and you tell me what to do. And then I started to do what people told me to do. So I wasn't doing what I thought. I was doing what people thought. And I think people started to see, oh, she's actually really doing what we said. Like, she was really listening. She's doing what I wanted to see. And then I think that helped people to see that I'm true and I'm authentic and I'm real and I'm not trying to do anything but, really I kind of almost view it as being a servant. Like, I'm here for you. I'm here to do what you, and then I'm going to use the things that I do know how to do to try to make that happen. And I think that, it takes time. And I think that ultimately, I'd be curious what somebody else would have to say. But I think But that's what I think. I think it's like really listening and being true and authentic. And I think similar to students, they could always read people, like if you're real or not. Yeah. And I think adults, the same thing. Like, are you real? And I think that, if you really true are real and you are authentic, people pick up on that.
As you speak, again, I told her I did my research. This is a thick book. But I want to go to page 175 because when you talk about listening and actually figuring out, hey, how can I be of service? And let me just cut the record straight for us, okay? You've done phenomenal work, and someone who teaches within those same communities that you've made such a phenomenal impact in. I appreciate people who do their job. Mm-hmm. And no matter what color you are, you being able to do your job and help out, be able to be a resource for students who go on high school, college, arrive to work on time, all these things that, won't be a proponent of success if they're not implemented. So those are things that I truly respect. And I want to also say, as you were speaking, this is a structured interview for intervention planning. And pretty much you give the student like you literally, hey, tell me about yourself. Yeah. Put the things down on paper and tell me, how do you enjoy your school day? These things, write the steps within your day, rate your day. This is phenomenal stuff. This is data. And allowing a student to voice themselves and get to know them in a way where it's measurable is phenomenal. This is just one of the many tools within the book that you talked about. So I find that to be amazing.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times adults working with children, even small children, we never ask them, like, what do you need? How do you learn best? What are things that have worked for you in your life? And so I think that's the intention behind that. And I do want to give credit to the authors of that chapter that actually created that.
Absolutely.
So I think it was Jennifer Betters-Bobin, Rebecca Pianta, and Elisa Lewis.
Yep, Jennifer.
There's Jennifer there. Rebecca Pianta and Elisa Lewis, I believe, are the ones that did that chapter.
Wow. Yep. Elisa Lewis is here.
Yeah. And I hope I'm not wrong about which authors I'm calling out.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
That is amazing. I want to switch gears a bit. We are becoming more aware of mental health throughout, I guess, these last 10 to 20 years. There has been a focus on mental health and its impact on our society. What are your opinions on mental health? And from your perspective, what are some resolutions that you believe you can provide for our students and who may be experiencing mental health challenges?
I think that, as far as I'm always looking through the lens of working in schools, because I think mental health is a whole big topic, but I think mental health, working in schools and how are schools supporting mental health and well-being, I think it's a big topic. I think we've come a long way in regard to the practices, the resources that we have in place. But I think that, and I think it's needed. And I think people are starting to see that more and more, if a student is not completely mentally present in the classroom, they're not able to engage to get all the learning that they need. But like I said, I do think that we are evolving with the practices that we're putting in place in schools. And so I do think that work is what, we need to continue to work on, which is part of the reason why I wanted to create this book as well, is kind of thinking about ways to do that in schools when there's so many competing demands. And I think that that's always a struggle for teachers, especially. I know you're a teacher. Yeah. What's my responsibility in this? Yeah. And I think that that's always the biggest challenge in schools is how to do the work. I think we all know it's needed. I think a lot of the practices are there, the resources there, but it's the how to do it that we struggle with.
Yeah. I mean, that's a fair point. And teachers, being a teacher myself, I've taught since, essentially I've had my own classroom for about 6 years now. And being able to, be adaptive and be resourceful as a teacher is one of the probably most important things you can be as a teacher, dealing with so many. I mean, you may have 24 kids inside of a classroom, 21, 24. Yeah. When I worked with CPS, it climbed to 28. What do you do when you have certain students inside of the classroom? They're experiencing so many different things at home. And I call it street data, right? Yeah. What can you pull from that situation? And then figure out a way to reach the students, like you said, inside of the classroom for academics. So just finding ways to alleviate those challenges and destroy those barriers is just not easy, but that's why the teaching job, the counseling job, the jobs educating the students, pushing them up to be productive people within society is not an easy one. You mentioned that many school counselors are assigned tasks and workloads that are not in alignment with what is recommended by the American School Counselor Association. This is a disservice to so many of our nation's youth. What do you mean by that?
So the American Counseling Association recommends one counselor for every 250 students. And so if we think about our counselor's role is actually quite complex. I mean, I worked in K-8 schools, but a lot of high school counselors are also supporting students with post-secondary readiness. So that's even, doing all the FAFSA applications, helping students with college admissions. And it's very complicated, and there's a lot of work that goes into that. And I think, coupling that with the high levels of social emotional need that we're talking about. And I think what makes counselors unique people in school buildings is that we have specialized training in that. And sometimes I feel like, we could even take for granted what we know as counselors that other people might not know about communication, how to talk to people, how to recognize signs of trauma and things like that, what to do about it. And so it's really helpful to have someone in the school building that knows how to, work with children, who maybe are experiencing trauma or depression. I know there's really high rates of suicide in the U.S. right now, and having someone there that can help support students. One thing that I always think is interesting is, speaking of North Lawndale and working at Lawndale Community Academy, is that there were such high levels of social and emotional learning needs that, I there's no way I could do it on my own. And so I even think the ratio needs to be smaller than that. And I think that to have, even 250 students could be a lot. And maybe there needs to even be more than that. I think some of it is just raising awareness for people in education to know what counselors even do and how we can provide support. And interestingly, schools in communities that are more affluent have higher numbers of counselors present. And so that there's also an equity issue there. So how come these students who have so much opportunity and access have a high level of school counseling support, whereas students in communities where maybe there's a lower socioeconomic status don't? And, and just how that contributes to widening opportunity gap.
There are a couple of things that I want to say, so stay with me here. But when you talked about being a person who is actually looking for resources in the communities that may not have as many, and that contributes to the mental health challenges. It says, and if the opportunities were there, you establish those relationships. And when I read the first part of your book, when you were speaking, you were talking about establishing relationships with outside community members, and you put yourself out there so that the students can have what they want to hear. I just want to read a little bit of this. It says, at one point in your career, you said that you formed a number of community partnerships, one with Juvenile Protective Association. They give social works for 3 days a week, academic and counselor interns, mentoring organizations that provide clinical counseling 4 days a week. Another community partner named Young Men's Educational Network that focuses on decision-making and helping students change their mindsets. When these programs and services are implemented, what's been your student observations, whether behavioral or academic?
That's a good question. I think that, it varies student by student and organization by organization. I think some students we saw have real buy-in to working with these organizations and, really forming relationships with them. I know that some of the organizations that I brought into the school continue to be there today. Interestingly, I was only in Lawndale Community Academy for 3 years, so I haven't seen the full, scope of that. And, a lot of times, just being that extra hand and support for students. It's unfortunate that some students that I worked with didn't make it despite these services and supports being there, but we did provide them everything that we could.
What are some of the biggest misconceptions that staff members in schools and other counselors maybe, or parents may have about students, what students need to improve in school? Because you see this a lot. You may go to a school and realize that they may need certain things that at your previous school they didn't necessarily need. Mm-hmm. Or you may have parents come in and say, hey, you know what? This is my child. I know what's best for my child. How do you navigate that? And what are some tools that you possibly use to help either come to a even ground with the parents or staff members, or say, hey, this is what I believe we can work towards and here's why?
Yeah, I think that what I know now, I think I would have done a better job with it then. Okay. I think then I was just like, I can't do this by myself. I want you here. I want you here. I want you here, trying to match organizations. But I think that you do need to sit down with them and you need to vet and screen them. You need to make sure that you're on the same page about the work that you're doing, have tools for, kind of monitoring press. I think sometimes it could be difficult between schools and organizations where we can't always share all the information that they might need about students. But I think that, again, I think it always comes down to collaborative conversations and getting to that common ground. But I think that, like you said, there are organizations, they have their mission, their vision, and, it could be hard to shift that. But it should always be about what students and communities need.
What do you believe certain institutions are still possibly getting wrong about mental health, even though they may have good intentions over the years? And I guess in your experience, how can they counteract that?
Are you talking about community organizations?
Community or just schools that
in general? I mean, I think this continues to be, I think people are coming more along with mental health services in schools and social emotional learning practices in schools, but there's a long way to go. And I think, like I said earlier, I think a lot of the research, the resources are there, but the question always comes into the how. And I think teachers have so much on their plates, how do I even have time to do any of this stuff? And I think even counselors, I don't have time to do all this. And I think that that's always the big question is the how. And my experience too, I feel like, unfortunately in schools and communities where you're understaffed and under-resourced, it's just such a heavy lift. But I think if you're working in a school that does have, a high level of mental health, behavioral support needs that, it's foundational. You're not going to get to the academic progress without it. And I think that sometimes people always think of social emotional learning or mental health as like lessons and presentations. But I always like to say it's part of everything that we do. It's saying hello in the morning. It's part of our classroom management strategies. It's part of our instructional practices, just generally how we put students to work in groups together, how we talk to kids. All of those things are social emotional learning. It's not just teaching lessons on an actual topic. And I think people always get that mixed up.
Obama gave a keynote speech at the School Council of the Year celebration. Part of the Reach Higher initiative, she started to promote higher education. Obama told the school counselors that their work is even more urgent and critically important at this moment in time. What do you think she meant by that when she said, you know what, their work is even more urgent and critically important at this moment in time? This is 2018.
Well, I think there's a lot there. The speech that Michelle Obama did at my event was actually the first speech that she did after leaving the White House and after Donald Trump was elected for his first term. And so I think that there was a lot in her speech when you listen closely to it and read it. And I think that she felt like it's needed, that the work that counselors are doing is very critical. I think that there's we're seeing it now, even, opportunity gaps widening with kind of grants and scholarship opportunities being taken away at higher levels. I think that she's, at that time, I think sees that and sees that school counselors, we're on the ground, we're doing the work, and sometimes we're that bridge that helps students have access to college and opportunities. And I think even, talking about the topic of social emotional learning too, that in her speech as well, I know that she also talked about, people in, high positions that you'll never meet, and also those that are on the ground. And she was really emphasizing that those on the ground have the higher impact because we can bring people together. We can let kids know that they're loved, they're cared about, and there's people that are really always standing behind them to support them. And I think that was critical at that time. And I think that was the message that she was trying to push through then, which I think is still relevant today.
Yeah, absolutely. You've seen a lot of different things in the educational sector. Was there anything in the school that you've seen where you just did not have an answer to? And looking back on it, what do you believe the answers could possibly be with a student, school, institution, or working with the community?
I mean, there's a lot of things I don't know the answer to. I think when I think of a student level, I mean, I know there's some students I worked so hard for, and I could never find the solution to get them back on track. And that was a struggle. And I think that it's complicated because there's so many things outside of the school too that have influence. And so, it's hard to navigate that. And I think that schools are complex because we're part of communities, we're part of politics, we're part of socioeconomic status, we're part of health, we're part of everything. We're weaved in that fabric. And I think a lot of times, it is hard to find the solution.
Yeah. I want to read something from your book here. It says, make sure I can find it here. It says, I coach schools that social emotional learning initiatives should be co-created through collaborative efforts with the school community and balanced across multiple team members. The schools that collaborated and shared SEL work thrived. However, when I saw the work being siloed with school counselors and other related service providers, it was often only partially implemented or ineffective. And there you pretty much say, hey, if you're looking to follow this baseline of working together, being a balanced community and collaborating with one another, it can be effective. But you've seen if it is not followed, it could be ineffective. Yeah.
So, well, first of all, I want to say when I had that job, it was such a challenging time. So I came into my role as a social emotional learning specialist. Right. I think it was 2 weeks later, the COVID-19 pandemic hit. And so it was a very complicated, challenging time. Schools were struggling. Sometimes I read that and I wonder if it makes it sound like I'm somebody who has all the answers, because that's not what it was. I mean, I think that was a time when none of us really knew what we were doing, you know, and I feel like I had this great experience to be able to see 27 different schools and how did they navigate that and how did they manage the complexities of that time. And I feel so privileged to have been able to see that. And that's what I saw. I saw that schools that really worked together, worked on teaming practices, worked on relationship building, they did the work a lot better. And the schools where I saw maybe a lot of delegating happening, you know, oh, you take social emotional learning. And, you know, to know, you know, I'm not going to give any principal who had to work during that time, you know, any slack. Yeah. I mean, that was unheard of circumstances and they were shouldering so much weight and I got to see it, you know, so I have so much respect for administrators. I got to see how much weight they had to carry. So I understand wanting to delegate it because you have 25 other things to do. But in this, you know, time of, you know, just high levels of social emotional need, mental health need, that it's needed. And what I actually saw too is that by not doing that, I would see teachers burning out because they were having a hard time managing student social emotional needs. I saw some schools where there was teachers taking leaves of absence even for mental health. And then that has a trickle effect because then now we have a classroom with a substitute in it and other people having to pick up the slack for it. And then they're getting burnt out, having to pick up the slack. And it all just has a ripple effect. And so, and that's where I saw other schools, you know, do a really good job of, you know, really bringing people together, mission and vision. We're here to support each other, work together. And I saw other schools during that time where their faculty and staff showed up. They were there. And I feel like a lot of it came down to those collaborative teaming practices and relationship.
Let me ask you this. You talked about, you've seen schools collaborate and it went well. Certain schools who may have at the top, you know, delegating and, okay, you run off and do that on halftime or whatever else. But you do understand that there may not be time. Here's what I want to ask. Do you believe that the system prevents schools to be enabled with certain schedules and time? Or do you believe that, you know what, if you, whatever system you're in, whatever district you're in, you can find a way to do it. It's just how you do it. What do you think is the issue there?
You know, it's complicated. Like I said, I was working as a social emotional learning specialist, coaching 27 schools during COVID, and I worked a lot with administrators during that time. I feel like I got to know so many of them. And I mean, like I'm telling you, that it was at that point in time that my respect for administrators grew. It's such challenging work. You have so many different things coming at you, like even thinking about the lunchroom and how are you going to get food out to families and, you know, technology and getting computer, you know, I mean, it's just so complex. And so, you know, like I said, you know, I have so much respect. I feel like I can't ever judge anybody that I worked with. It's so complicated and it's so challenging. But I think that one thing I've seen some administrators do is that they look at everything coming at them and then they make authentic choices for what they know is best for their school. And sometimes maybe that means you're going to let something go and be a little mediocre on the side, but I'm going to do what I know is right for our schools. And, you know, we would sometimes laugh about it, like, oh, we know they're going to do whatever. But right. some principals were never doing anything that we coached them on doing because they knew what was right for their school and their community. So, you know, you're thriving, you know, so I think like a good leader and even a teacher or a counselor, you know, you're able to kind of take all these things that are coming at you and being able to kind of sift through that by knowing what's right and what's needed. And that's where the energy should be put, because we're always going to have a million things, especially in schools where you have to bear so much weight. You're always going to have so many things coming at you, but you have to be able to sift through it and do what you know is right. And maybe that means like you're doing something else kind of mediocre, and that's okay because you know it's not important.
There you go. There you go. Despite the great passion I felt for the communities I was serving, I could not deny the fact that I was experiencing burnout. And no matter how, you know, great and pushing the pavement and being resourceful, that came up for you. And we talked about, personally, we talked about it a little bit off camera, but being able to pretty much be aware of how you're feeling and what you can contribute before it pretty much cancels you out in a way that you don't, wouldn't want for yourself. Can you talk about that moment leading up to that and why you just decided to, take it aside?
Yeah. So I think I had been experiencing it actually for a long time, and I just didn't give attention to it because, there's signs of burnout, like you're getting emotional, you're getting frustrated. And I was having all those signs, but I wasn't paying attention to it. I know in my book, I talked about one of the principals I worked with, and she was just doing something where she was just checking on adults. How are you? Because nobody ever asks the leaders how they're doing.
Right.
So how are you? I know we're always asking everyone else how they are, but how are you? And I told her, I'm not good. I'm not doing good. And she was the first person that asked me that. And I was like, wow, that's my response. Like, I'm not doing well. And I felt like that was kind of a moment where I'm like, wow, I think I actually need to slow down. So during COVID, I was supporting those 27 schools. I was also the president of the Illinois Counseling Association, and I was teaching a course at DePaul University. So I had 3 jobs. But interestingly, as much as I was doing all of that work, I don't think it was the work itself that was making me feel depleted. I think it was my negligence of my personal life that was depleting me. That, you have to have work-life balance. You have to take care of yourself. And I realized, I've been giving so much at the neglect of myself. And I found that I just didn't have energy left anymore. My energy level was really low, like I completely depleted. And so, yes, that was a wake-up call for me that I have to do something about this. I can't continue to work at this high speed. Then I had to pull back.
Yeah. I mean, being able to pour into yourself so that you can pour into others.
Yeah.
Working in the school sector and being all the things that you've done and that we've talked about, what was more so challenging? You mentioned your being able to actually pour into yourself and just live a life outside of your work took a toll on you. So that's eventually why you stepped away. But when you were in it, you said the work wasn't necessarily, the toughest. I want to ask you, because I really want this answer, honestly, for myself at this moment in time. What was the biggest challenge when you were working? Was it navigating the people or was it doing the work? Out of those two, what was the biggest challenge?
Yeah. It's interesting. I think that for me, working at the school level, I think it was, I'm very empathetic. I'm a very empathetic person. And so I think for me, it was absorbing other people's stress. So maybe it's like teacher stress or principal stress. And so it wasn't working with children. It wasn't working with families. It wasn't working with communities. It wasn't the actual work itself. I think for me, it was absorbing other people's stress because I didn't want them to be stressed out. I wanted to do everything I could to make them feel supported, to make them feel like, I was helping them to do their job more effectively. And, and sometimes, and I think you see this a lot more in leadership as well, people complaining about like, well, what are you doing? And so you have to also deal with that feedback all the time. And then and so I think like, here you are working at high speed, doing everything that you can all the time. And then you have to also deal with this like critique, you know what I mean? And sometimes that could be a little challenging, especially for an empathetic person like myself. But one thing that I've been learning, as I've stepped away from the work somewhat, is that you have to have boundaries and barriers there that are like psychological barriers because they're not like actual wall barriers, but I'm not going, your stress is your stress.
Yeah, I'm not going to let you do this to me today.
Yeah,
I'm not going to do
that's your stress.
Yeah.
And, you don't agree with this intervention, but that's your opinion, but that's not everyone else's opinion, and not absorbing that.
Yeah.
Like a mental mind game.
Beautiful way to answer my question. I only have a couple questions left here.
Okay.
Let's take a step back from all of this. We're going to look at some current events that may be going on today. I just really want your take on it. This week in higher DEI news, it came out that the trend in a significant dismantling of rebranding of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, under political pressure and new federal guidance, with schools like Johns Hopkins University cutting diversity staff, ending race-exclusive scholarships, and shifting away from traditional DEI officers as institutions adapt to anti-DEI laws and Trump administration executive orders, creating a complex landscape of compliance and cultural change across hundreds of campuses. How do you personally, your opinion, how do you feel about this, and do you believe that this is a step in the right direction for education in general?
I was thinking about this question deeply. And so I decided that one way I wanted to answer it was actually just breaking it apart, the D, the E, and the I. And so, the D, diversity. So I'm a history major as my undergrad degree.
Yep.
And I think that growing up in St. Charles, and, I learned a very Eurocentric history of the world, and
Sure.
Didn't learn about the rest of the world, really. I learned about Europe and the United States, but there's a gigantic world out there. And I wasn't exposed to it more till I went to college. And I think in college, I learned more critical thinking skills about history and looking through multiple lenses. And I think the reality is that, this world is diverse, is complex. And I think that by not taking the time to look through different cultural lenses and different history, we don't really understand the societies that we're living in currently. And anyone who knows anything about U.S. history, it's always been diverse. There's never been a point that it wasn't. And so, if you want to talk about when European colonizers started coming over to the Americas, it's always been, there's never been a time that it wasn't. So doing away with diversity, no, right. That's not, that's not real. And neglecting our nation's children from having a worldview, I think, is not the right thing to do. I think, I'm currently living in Asia, and I'm exposed to all these histories that I didn't learn growing up, and cultural perspectives. And I feel like what a disservice to our children to not have a worldview and really understand the histories of the world from different perspectives. When I think about equity, I know a lot of times people think about equality, but I think of equity more as like opportunity. And I feel like when you look at different cultures and societies throughout the world, there are structures around them, whether it's political structures, corporate finance structures that kind of design the country and the way things function within different societies in the world. And I think in the US, there has been a structural design from white colonization that puts white people as the ones who have the greatest benefit for the opportunity. And I think there's been so much studies about that there's no denying it. It's a fact. You could read anything about redlining. You could read anything about studies about names and who gets access based off of your job application. Like, it's just a fact. Do I think that needs to change? Yes. I think that, like I said, this is a multicultural society. It always has been. Why should only one racial group have all the opportunity and all the access? And I know that it's not always necessarily white people, sometimes great wealth, but I think even if you look at a lot of the CEOs in the United States, they tend to be white. And so how are we creating a society where people have opportunity and access? So I think taking grants and scholarships away from students is absolutely not the right thing to do. Do I think we need to look at how we're structurally designing things in our country? Absolutely. I think that needs to change. And I think it's a disservice. I don't think that's the right thing to do. Inclusion. And, I always look at this more through the social emotional learning lens. I've spent a lot of writing this book the last few years really thinking deeply about the connection between identity and your social emotional development. And I think that it's amazing the ways that you don't realize that your identity is connected to how you feel about yourself, the confidence that you have in yourself, your ability to believe in yourself and move through the world. And I think that by helping people be more inclusive, understanding one another, and I think those are all the social constructs like race, sexuality, gender, all of those things. I think that, being more inclusive, letting people be part of the game together, come together, understand each other better. And for that, I think of progressiveness. Like, I'm a progressive. I don't feel like we should stay stuck in the ways of old. We're always moving forward. Why go backwards or forward into something that's just a mess? And I think it's all really complicated. And there's no easy solutions to how to do that work or how to move forward. But I think that absolutely is not the right thing to do.
With AI on the rise, DEI programs and initiatives in question of being funded federally, other people have taken community learning into their own hands. Right? So Black families are forming homeschooling co-ops like Cultural Roots Co-op for community-based learning, and educators are creating digital spaces like Hillman Talk University on TikTok to provide culturally relevant education. What's your opinion on AI and the social dynamic you've seen on learning?
Yeah.
If you've seen it, and possibly give an opinion on it, is it accurate to support families who are addressing their students' needs through avenues such as TikTok and providing culturally relevant education?
Yeah. I think this is the future, AI. I'm not so in the loop on stuff like that. I've been living in Singapore for the last 4 years, and so I'm in a whole different world.
Can you get on TikTok?
I don't. Yeah, you can. Yeah.
Okay.
You can. I don't pay attention to. I don't have a TikTok though.
Okay.
But my thoughts on AI. So, there's a lot of different platforms, and I know some coming out of China, some coming out of different parts of the world. And everyone's playing around with it right now. So it is the future. I think that to not utilize it, to not pay attention to it's not the right thing to do. However, I know that for a lot of the tools that are being created in the U.S. and some parts of the world, there is, it's documented like a Eurocentric perspective. But I use, Gemini and ChatGPT sometimes to like think about, my wording or think about, lesson plans and things like that to think of how can I make this lesson more culturally responsive? And I think that you can do that through prompting, but I think that we're not there yet because of the fact that it does have that Eurocentric lens, that you have to know how to prompt it. You have to know how to review the materials and be able to critique it. And with that, you can't take away from the learning that needs to happen. You need to study culturally relevant teaching. You need to study about diversity, equity, and inclusion work to know what to prompt and to know how to vet the material. Because it can go into these hallucinations and different rabbit holes that might not actually be giving you accurate information, depending on how you prompt it. So I feel like we're not there yet, but I do believe we should use it, but you can't use it without also learning and understanding the topics that you're trying to, use it for as well.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. You moved to Singapore.
I did.
Tell us about how you feel currently.
Yeah.
And just, reflecting on everything you've done and you're in Singapore. Tell us how that is and maybe how what you've done has helped you along the way and, how it has, put you in a spot mentally here. You're, on vacation now, but how has it been impactful to you currently in Singapore?
Yeah. So as you know, I was burnt out and I knew someone that was working in an international school, and it just so happened that she was in Singapore and she said, there's a job opening here. I applied for it and I got the job. And it's been so much more than I ever could have expected it to be. It's given me the opportunity to pause, to have more work-life balance, to reflect on all of my experiences that I've had. And like I said, I was burnt out, and I think that even in some ways, maybe I was holding some level of a vicarious trauma in my body that I didn't realize I was holding. And it's given me kind of space and time to kind of work through that and understand myself more. But I think, that's what led to me then working on the book, because I had time. I had time to work on it, and also kind of reflecting back on, things I've learned in my career. I've been this is my 4th school year in Singapore. I think, I think my biggest takeaway now is that you really do need to always go back to your mission and your vision with doing the work, because, you can get taken so off track. You could forget yourself, you could forget your why, and that you really need to always find space to go back to that. And I think sometimes people are afraid to walk away from their work for so many different reasons, pension plans, namely, I'd say is probably the big one, family, a lot of things like that. But I think that, I was willing to take that chance because I knew I really needed to reset. And I think that, gave me the opportunity to create this book. And now I feel like my worldview has expanded. There's been so many unexpected things that I've gained from this experience that I'm really, really grateful for.
Yeah. 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 I mean, so Singapore, I mean, who are you? I mean, so how did they set you up in Singapore? Like they put you with people who speak English, or do you,
I don't, you know what's always interesting? So, Singapore is in Southeast Asia, but it's an English speaking country.
Really?
Yeah, it actually was founded in 1965. So it's not even 100 years old yet. And in just that short amount of time has come one of the leaders of the world. It's really an amazing place. There's no, public violence. Everyone has jobs for the most part. I mean, it's a very extremely safe country, and also a thriving country. So it's been a really great experience. The school, they actually this is why I was saying I didn't know what I was walking into. They actually shipped all of my belongings out on a freight ship. They put me up in a 5-star hotel when I arrived.
Wow.
I was like, okay.
Hey, Meg.
This is how I'm
Singapore.
living my life right now. I've traveled to, I think I counted about 24 different countries since living in Singapore. And so it's really, truly been just this unexpected gift.
Well, I plan on doing a little traveling. Me and Meg, we could come out, show us around, and, we can go from there. This has been an amazing interview. Just the things that you've been able to enlighten us on. And not only that, take us through I really felt like I was part of your journey right now. And just, you taking us through it.
Yeah.
And the impact that you've had on education is astounding. I will hope that people like you don't lose that passion in the beginning part of the journey, because so many kids need it. Unfortunately, we are in a system where it may work for other people, and for other people it may not work as well. So we want to just keep pushing for that. And for me, I want to do the best job I possibly can to help get those voices and minds out there, which is why I started Beyond the Book. And understanding the magnitude of the message is important to me. So I appreciate you for coming on. What are some things, as you in closing, that you can just leave us with the audience and educators, families, people who watch Beyond the Book?
I think I kind of said it when I was talking about my move to Singapore, and this is just kind of what I'm doing now, is really to listen to yourself, protect your energy, pay attention to your own personal well-being. And I think also, that passion and purpose is so necessary as well for our own well-being too. Without it, we don't feel full in life. And so, really always periodically taking that time to pause and reflect and think about, what matters to you, and grounding yourself in your purpose and keeping it protected, I think is my message.
All right. This has been another episode of Beyond the Book. Thank you again. And I hope to see you. Maybe not.
Unless you come visit.
Unless you come, But thank you guys. Beyond the Book signing out. Thanks, Luke.
Thank you.